It was a crisp morning in the small town of Fairfield, and the sun had barely peaked above the horizon, casting a golden glow over the quiet streets. The town was usually calm, its rhythm dictated by the daily routines of its residents. People hurried to work, children laughed and played on their way to school, and the local cafe, the Cozy Corner, was just beginning to fill with its usual crowd of early risers. Lily Matthews, 8 months pregnant, stood behind the counter of the cafe, wiping down tables with practiced ease. Her belly, round and swollen, made the task a bit more challenging than it used to be, but she did her best to keep a smile on her face. Despite the occasional discomfort, she loved the routine, her little escape before the world grew more complicated. She had always been independent, and although her pregnancy had come as a surprise, she had quickly learned to adapt. Working at the cafe had always been a steady job, one she could rely on, but lately, she felt the weight of her responsibilities pressing down on her more than ever. Her boss, Greg, was a kind man who owned the cafe and usually stayed out of the way, preferring to focus on the kitchen. He trusted Lily to handle the floor and often complimented her on how well she balanced her work and pregnancy. But today, something felt different. The cafe felt quieter than usual, and Lily couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. She glanced up as the doorbell above the entrance jingled, signaling the arrival of a customer. A man, dressed in a sharp suit, entered with a confident stride, his dark sunglasses perched on his nose despite the early hour. His tailored suit, which was clearly expensive, caught Lily's attention, and she couldn't help but admire how effortlessly he carried himself. He was the kind of man people noticed, tall, with chiseled features and an air of authority that seemed to fill the room the moment he walked in. But it wasn't just his appearance that piqued Lily's curiosity. There was something about the way he scanned the room, his eyes lingering on her for just a second longer than necessary, that made her uneasy. Charles Harper, the man in question, had been a regular in the town for several months. He owned multiple businesses in the area, most notably a luxury hotel that had recently opened up on the outskirts of Fairfield. He was known for his cold, calculating demeanor, and rumors of his ruthlessness in business had spread like wildfire through the town. Yet, Lily had never had any direct dealings with him. She knew him only by reputation and the occasional fleeting encounter when he passed through the cafe. Most of the time, he seemed distant, focused on his phone or his thoughts, ignoring the rest of the world. Today, however, was different. He didn't sit at his usual spot by the. The following day, the cafe was bustling with its usual morning crowd. The steady hum of conversation filled the air, along with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and pastries. It was a familiar scene for Lily, and though she had learned to enjoy the simplicity of her routine, something had felt off since her interaction with Charles Harper the day before. It wasn't just the unexpectedness of his offer or the way he seemed to judge her every move, it was the lingering sense that his visit had meant more than she initially realized. As she wiped down the counter, her mind kept drifting back to the encounter. She couldn't shake the feeling that she had been tested in some way, though she couldn't understand why or how. The thought gnawed at her, and despite herself, she found herself scanning the cafe's entrance every few minutes, half expecting to see Charles walk through the door again. But as the hours passed and the cafe began to quiet down, it became clear that he hadn't returned. That thought should have relieved her, but it didn't. Instead, it left her feeling uneasy, as though she was waiting for something else to happen, something that would reveal the true meaning behind their interaction. It wasn't like Lily to second-guess herself. She had always been independent, used to handling things on her own. But Charles had unsettled her in a way that she couldn't quite explain. She had turned down his offer of help, and while part of her was proud of her decision, another part of her wondered if she had made a mistake. Maybe she should have accepted his help. After all, she was about to bring a new life into the world. Things weren't easy, and there was no shame in asking for help when it was offered. Yet, something about his approach felt wrong. It wasn't just the money, it was the way he had tested her, as though she were some kind of experiment. It wasn't until later in the afternoon, when the cafe had emptied out and Lily was taking a much-needed break, that she saw him again. This time, he entered without the usual air of dominance, without the sunglasses or the sharp suit. He was dressed casually in a dark jacket and jeans, a far cry from the polished businessman she had met the day before. He looked almost human. The sight of him threw her off guard, and she felt her heart race in a way that was both unexpected and unsettling. She had been so sure that their previous encounter had been a one-off, that he would never darken the door of her cafe again. Yet here he was, standing in front of her with an almost casual smile on his face. For a moment, neither of them spoke. She simply stood there, staring at him, unsure of how to react. Charles, for his part, seemed to take no notice of her hesitation. Instead, he gave her a small nod of acknowledgement, as though nothing had happened between them the day before. "Coffee," he said, his tone casual, as if they were old acquaintances and not strangers who had shared a strange, unsettling interaction. "Sure," Lily replied, her voice almost mechanical as she forced herself to move. Her mind was racing, but she didn't know what to think. Was he back to apologize for the previous day, or was this some continuation of his test? As she prepared his coffee, she tried to push the thoughts out of her head. The strange energy between them was palpable, and she couldn't help but wonder if she was overthinking everything. But then again, the fact that he had come back at all made it hard to believe that there was nothing more to it. After handing him his coffee, she took a deep breath and made an effort to keep the conversation light. "I didn't expect to see you again," she said, glancing up at him. "Is everything all right?" Charles smiled, a faint smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. He sipped his coffee and looked around the cafe, as though taking in the familiar surroundings. "Just thought I'd check in. I've been thinking about our conversation." He paused, eyes locking with hers for a moment. "You surprised me, you know. Most people would have jumped at the chance for some extra help, but you didn't. That kind of integrity is rare." Lily felt her heart beat faster. The way he spoke was almost too calculated, too deliberate. It made her skin crawl, but she tried to keep her expression neutral. "It's just not the way I do things. I've always figured it out on my own." "I can respect that," Charles said, leaning forward slightly. "But you don't have to do everything on your own. Life doesn't have to be a constant struggle, you know. Sometimes it's okay to accept a little help. We all need it from time to time." Lily swallowed hard. She wasn't sure what he was trying to get at. "I'm fine," she replied, her voice firm but not unkind. "I don't need anything from you." The silence that followed was thick, filled with unspoken words. Charles seemed to study her again, his gaze not quite piercing but still intense enough to make her feel exposed. It was the kind of look that made her wonder if he was sizing her up for something more than just a coffee order. "All right, Lily," he said, leaning back in his chair with a thoughtful expression. "But just so you know, you've got a lot more going for you than you think. It's not easy to find people like you." Lily couldn't decide if his words were a compliment or a veiled warning. She was beginning to feel like she was in some kind of game she didn't understand. And that unsettled her more than she. The next morning, Lily arrived early at the cafe. The sky was overcast, casting a dull light through the windows. The cafe, usually full of life by now, seemed unusually quiet. She busied herself with preparing for the day, organizing the counter and making sure everything was in order. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen, that the calm before the storm was settling in. Her mind kept drifting back to Charles and the strange encounter they had shared the day before. His words echoed in her mind, "I'll be back tomorrow." The certainty in his voice had been unsettling, and she couldn't stop wondering what he wanted from her. As she set up for the day, she thought about the offer he had made, the money, the help. At first, it had seemed like a blessing, an opportunity to make her life easier as she prepared for the arrival of her baby. But now, After thinking about it, she couldn't help but feel like it had been some sort of test. A challenge, a game he had set up to see how she would respond. What kind of person would offer money in such a way, as though they were gauging her worth or integrity? Was that even help, or was it just manipulation? She didn't want to believe the latter, but her gut told her something wasn't right. The bell above the door chimed, and Lily's heart skipped a beat. She turned, expecting to see the usual morning rush of customers, but instead, it was Charles. He stood in the doorway, dressed in his casual attire once again, his eyes scanning the cafe with an air of quiet confidence. The moment he walked in, the atmosphere in the room shifted. It wasn't just the fact that he had returned, it was the way he carried himself, the way he seemed to know exactly how to enter a room and draw attention. Lily had never been a fan of attention, but with Charles, it felt unavoidable. "Morning, Lily," he said, his voice smooth and almost playful. There was no awkwardness this time, no sense of hesitation as there had been during their last encounter. It was as though they had been friends for years, though Lily knew that wasn't the case. "I hope I didn't catch you at a bad time." She forced a smile, trying to mask the anxiety building up in her chest. "No, it's fine. What can I get you today?" "I'll take the usual," he replied, his eyes never leaving hers. The air between them was charged, and Lily could feel the weight of his gaze on her. She nodded and began preparing his coffee, her hands slightly trembling as she worked. She couldn't help but feel like this was another test, a new round of his game. Was he going to push her again? Would he try to test her resolve once more? As she handed him the coffee, their fingers brushed briefly, sending a jolt of electricity through her body. She quickly pulled her hand back, her face flushed with embarrassment. Charles didn't seem to notice, or if he did, he didn't acknowledge it. He simply took the coffee with a smile and sat down at one of the small tables by the window. Lily returned to the counter, her thoughts swirling. For the next hour, Charles stayed at the cafe, sipping his coffee and observing the surroundings. He didn't engage much with anyone else, keeping to himself for the most part, but Lily could feel his presence like a shadow looming over her. She couldn't focus on her work, couldn't push away the thoughts that kept creeping into her mind. Why had he returned? What did he want from her? Was he going to offer her more money, more help? Or was this just his way of testing her again, seeing if she would break, if she would ask for something more? Around mid-morning, as the cafe filled with the usual crowd of regulars and newcomers, Charles stood up and made his way to the counter. Lily tried to focus on the coffee machine, her mind a mess of conflicting emotions. She wasn't sure if she was angry, confused, or just afraid. But when he reached the counter, his voice broke through the haze of her thoughts. "You've been on my mind all morning," he said, his tone low but clear. Lily's heart skipped a beat, and she looked up at him, unsure of how to respond. I didn't expect you to come back today." Charles gave her a small smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I had to see for myself if you meant what you said yesterday." "What do you mean?" Lily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You turned me down yesterday," he said, leaning in slightly, his eyes never leaving hers. "I couldn't help but wonder if you were really sure about your decision, if you really knew what you were passing up." Lily felt a shiver run down her spine. She couldn't believe what he was implying. Was he trying to manipulate her again, make her second-guess herself? She swallowed hard and looked away, gathering her thoughts before speaking. "I'm sure about my decision," she said firmly, her voice gaining strength. "I don't need your money. I don't need your help. I can do this on my own." For a moment, Charles didn't say anything. He just stood there, watching her with that unreadable expression on his face. Lily could feel the weight of his gaze pressing down on her, making her feel exposed, vulnerable. Then, without warning, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a thick envelope. He placed it on the counter in front of her, his eyes locked onto hers as he did so. "I don't think you understand what I'm offering," he said softly. "This isn't just about money. It's about opportunity. It's about giving you a chance to change your life." Lily stared at the envelope, her heart racing. She didn't want to take it. She didn't want to accept anything from him. But the temptation was there, lingering just beneath the surface. She had always struggled financially, always worked hard just to make ends meet. Could this be the opportunity she had been waiting for? Could this be the thing that would finally give her a break? The thoughts churned in her mind, but she didn't let them show on her face. "I don't need your charity," she said, her voice steady, though her hands were trembling. "I'm not interested in whatever you're offering." Charles looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. He didn't push, didn't try to convince her again. Instead, he simply nodded, as though he had expected this response. "All right, Lily," he said quietly. "But remember, I'm not just offering charity. I'm offering a way out. It's your choice." With that, he turned and walked out of the cafe without another word. Lily watched him go, her heart still racing, her mind a whirlwind of confusion. The envelope sat on the counter in front of her, and for the first time since he had left, she allowed herself to reach out and touch it. The weight of it felt heavy in her hands, as though it contained more than just money. It felt like a turning point, a decision that would change everything. But the question remained, should she open it? Should she take the chance, or stand firm and continue on her own path? As the minutes passed, Lily realized that the choice wasn't just about money. It was about trust. It was about whether she could trust this man, this stranger who had come into her life with promises of a better future. Could she trust him, or was he just another person trying to manipulate her for his own gain? The decision loomed over her, and as she looked out the window, she saw the world moving on without her, as though everything was still the same. But Lily knew that, for her, nothing would ever be the same again. Whatever she decided now would set the course for her future, and the future of her child. Lily stood in the cafe, staring at the envelope on the counter. Her fingers hovered over it, but she couldn't bring herself to open it. The weight of the decision felt heavier with every passing second. She had worked so hard to get to this point in her life, and now, this man, this billionaire CEO, had appeared out of nowhere, offering her what seemed like an impossible opportunity. But there was always a catch, wasn't there? She knew that nothing in life came without strings attached, especially from someone like him. She had seen enough of the world to know that people didn't offer help for free. It was a test, a way to see how she would respond, to see if she would take the bait. The cafe buzzed around her as customers chatted, clinking coffee cups, and the sound of milk frothing filled the air. But to Lily, everything felt muted, as though the world had slowed down. All she could hear was the beat of her own heart, loud and steady in her chest. She could feel the eyes of the cafe's regulars on her, but she couldn't focus on them. Instead, she was consumed with thoughts of what to do next. Her fingers trembled as she finally reached for the envelope. Her heart pounded in her chest, her mind racing with conflicting thoughts. She had never been the type to rely on others. She had always prided herself on being self-sufficient, on doing things on her own. But now, with a baby on the way, the weight of her responsibilities had grown. She couldn't deny the truth, she was struggling. The bills were piling up, the future was uncertain, and the idea of having a child with no financial stability was terrifying. Maybe this was the break she had been waiting for. With a deep breath, she tore open the envelope. Inside, there was a stack of bills, more money than she had ever seen in her life. The total amount seemed like an impossibility, but there it was, right in front of her. It was more than enough to cover her rent, medical bills, and any other expenses she could think of. It was everything she needed to get through the next few months, to provide for her child without the constant anxiety of wondering how she would make ends meet. But as she held the money, a sinking feeling settled in her stomach. What was the cost of this? she thought. There was no such thing as a free lunch. Lily's mind raced as she tried to make sense of what was happening. The money was right there, and it could solve all of her problems in an instant. But what would Charles expect in return? She had already rejected him once, and yet here he was again, dangling this impossible opportunity in front of her. What was the game he was playing, and what would it mean for her and her baby? Was it worth the risk? As the minutes passed, Lily felt her resolve begin to waver. The weight of the decision was becoming unbearable, and she could feel the pressure mounting. But just as she was about to make up her mind, the door to the cafe opened, and Charles walked back in. His presence immediately filled the room, and Lily's heart skipped a beat. He walked up to the counter, his expression unreadable. "I see you've opened it," he said, his voice calm but with an edge of something else. There was no surprise in his tone, no sense of urgency. It was as though he had expected this outcome from the very beginning. Lily looked at him, her fingers still clutching the envelope. She felt a mix of anger, frustration, and confusion. "What is this, Charles? Why are you doing this to me?" she asked, her voice shaking with emotion. Charles's gaze softened for a moment, but there was still something distant in his eyes, something that made Lily feel like she was a pawn in his game. "I'm not doing anything to you, Lily," he said gently. "I'm offering you a choice. You don't have to take it. But if you do, I can promise you that your life will change. For the better." Lily clenched her jaw, her grip tightening around the envelope. She didn't want to admit it, but she could feel the pull of the offer. The idea of a better life for her child was too tempting to ignore. She could see the stability, the security, the future she had always dreamed of. But at what cost? "I don't know what you're trying to do," she said, her voice wavering slightly. "I don't know why you're offering this, but it feels wrong. It doesn't feel like help. It feels like a test. Like you're waiting for me to fail." Charles stood still for a moment, and then he sighed, as though he had been expecting this reaction all along. "I'm not testing you, Lily," he said quietly. "I'm offering you an opportunity. You can take it or leave it. But don't fool yourself into thinking you can do everything on your own. No one can. Everyone needs help sometimes. The difference is that some people are willing to accept it, and others aren't." Lily felt a wave of frustration wash over her. She had never been one to ask for help, to rely on anyone else. It had always been her against the world, and she had prided herself on making it on her own. But now, standing in front of Charles, with the envelope of money in her hands, she couldn't ignore the truth any longer. She needed help. She had always needed help. But she didn't want it to come from him, not like this. "I don't want your help," she said firmly, though the words felt hollow in her mouth. "I don't want anything from you." Charles's eyes narrowed, and for a brief moment, there was a flicker of something cold in his expression. "That's your choice, Lily. But remember, you don't get to walk away from everything forever. Life doesn't work that way. At some point, you're going to have to decide if you're ready to accept what's being offered, or if you're going to let it slip through your fingers." Lily stood there, frozen, her heart pounding in her chest. She wanted to reject him, to turn away and walk out of the cafe, leaving everything behind. But the reality was, she couldn't. She couldn't afford to be so stubborn, to let her pride get in the way of her child's future. And yet, accepting this man's offer, his game, felt like she would be giving up a part of herself. She didn't want to lose her dignity, her independence. But was there a way to have both? Was there a way to take his offer without losing who she was? Before she could respond, Charles turned and walked out of the cafe, leaving her standing there, alone with her thoughts. The envelope still sat on the counter, the money inside almost mocking her with its tempting promise. Lily felt a lump form in her throat as she picked it up, her fingers trembling. She had a decision to make, one that would change everything. But no matter what choice she made, Lily knew one thing for sure: the past few days had already changed her. Whether for better or for worse, she couldn't say yet. But she couldn't ignore the fact that, no matter what happened, her life would never be the same. The question now was, could she take the offer, and still be true to herself? Or would she walk away, knowing that doing so might cost her more than she could afford? Lily couldn't stop thinking about the decision she had to make. Her hands gripped the steering wheel of her old car as she drove through the streets, but her mind was somewhere far away, in a place where the choices felt like they were suffocating her. Every turn felt more uncertain than the last. Her baby's due date was drawing closer, and with each passing day, the reality of her situation became harder to ignore. She had promised herself she wouldn't let this pregnancy become a trap, a cage that would define the rest of her life. She'd always prided herself on being independent, self-sufficient, but now, the weight of it all was unbearable. The bills kept coming, the work hours were endless, and the future seemed so bleak. Every night she fell asleep with a knot in her stomach, wondering how she would keep going. Charles's offer lingered in her mind like an open door, one that could lead to a brighter future, or perhaps something darker. She had seen his type before, wealthy and powerful, offering things that seemed too good to be true, but always with a catch. Maybe that's how the world worked, she thought. Those who had it all didn't offer help without some hidden agenda. But the question gnawed at her. Was she being too cynical? Was this a chance she could actually take, or was she walking into a trap? The thought of what her life could look like if she accepted the offer was tempting. No more struggling, no more wondering how she would make it through the month. She could finally breathe, could finally focus on the things that really mattered: her baby, her future, and her well-being. She could escape the grind, the constant feeling of never being enough. But then, the doubts would creep in again. What was he really asking for in return? And if it was all a test, would she fail? The pressure to succeed, to prove herself, weighed heavily on her shoulders. She had never been good at asking for help, and she certainly didn't want to feel indebted to anyone, especially someone like Charles. Her phone buzzed, breaking her out of her thoughts. It was a message from her mother, reminding her that the baby shower was in 2 days. The excitement in the text was palpable, but it only served to deepen the pit in Lily's stomach. It felt as though everyone else in her life had everything figured out. They had support systems, families who could help, and their futures seemed secure. But Lily, despite her best efforts, was barely holding it together. The guilt she felt about her situation was suffocating. She wanted to be the one who had it all together, who could smile at the baby shower and talk about the future with excitement, not fear. But that wasn't her reality. After pulling into her apartment complex, Lily sat in the car for a few moments, staring at the empty space in front of her. The world outside felt like it was moving faster than she could keep up with. The baby, her responsibilities, the looming offer from Charles, it was all too much. She wasn't sure how much longer she could keep pretending that she had everything under control. As she opened the door to her apartment, she was greeted by the faint smell of the pizza she had ordered earlier that week. The kitchen was a mess, the countertops cluttered with unopened bills, empty cups, and forgotten takeout containers. It wasn't a home she felt proud of, not the kind of place she had always imagined for herself. It was a place of survival, not living. Her heart sank as she looked around. This was not the future she had envisioned for herself, and it certainly wasn't the future she wanted for her baby. She set her purse on the kitchen counter and went to the window, gazing out at the street below. The world outside was bustling, full of people going about their daily routines, completely unaware of the internal battle she was fighting. There was a small part of her that wanted to join them, to feel like she was part of a world where things made sense. But every time she tried to picture that life, something held her back. It was as if she were standing on the edge of a cliff, staring down at the unknown, unsure whether to take the leap or retreat to the safety of what she knew. The knock on the door startled her, and for a moment, she didn't know whether she was imagining it. She wasn't expecting anyone. She hesitated, but then her curiosity got the better of her. She walked over to the door and opened it cautiously, only to find Charles standing there, his tall frame blocking the hallway light. "I need to talk to you," he said, his voice calm but insistent. Lily's heart skipped a beat. "I thought I made myself clear the last time we spoke. I don't want your help, Charles. I don't need anything from you." Charles's eyes softened slightly, though there was still a look of determination in them. "I'm not here to pressure you," he said quietly. "I'm here because I believe you can do better than this. I know what it's like to feel stuck, to feel like there's no way out. But I want to offer you something that could change everything." Lily crossed her arms, trying to appear unaffected, but her emotions were running wild beneath the surface. She could feel her pulse quickening as he spoke. "And what exactly do you think you can offer me that I don't already have?" He took a step closer, his presence undeniable. "Freedom," he said simply. "A chance to start over, to build something better for you and your baby. You don't have to struggle anymore. You don't have to go through life feeling like you're just getting by. This is your chance to have a life that's worth living." Lily sat down on the couch, staring at the quiet room around her. The ticking of the clock on the wall was the only sound in the apartment, and it felt like the seconds were stretching on forever. The offer from Charles hung in the air, his words echoing in her mind. Every part of her wanted to reject it outright, to continue fighting for the life she had known, the life that had always been hers. But another part of her was so tired, so incredibly tired of struggling to make ends meet, of watching the months go by with no real progress. It had been a constant uphill battle, and there were days when she wondered if it was worth it. As she sat there, her mind drifted to the baby growing inside her. She could already feel the bond, the connection, even though the baby was still months away from being born. She wanted so badly to give this child a better life, a life where they didn't have to go without. She wanted them to know love, to feel safe, to have opportunities she never had. But the world felt like it was pressing down on her, squeezing the life out of her dreams. Her options seemed limited, her choices few. And then Charles had appeared, offering her an escape. But what kind of escape was it really? She had always prided herself on her self-reliance, her ability to make her own way. Was it really a win to accept help from someone like him, someone whose motives were unclear, whose power seemed endless? Would she be trading one kind of prison for another? These thoughts kept her awake at night, turning in her mind like a broken record. The baby kicked suddenly, reminding her that there was someone else involved in this decision. Someone who depended on her, who needed her to make the right choices. The urgency in that realization hit her harder than anything else. She wasn't just responsible for herself anymore. Her baby needed her to be strong, to make choices that would lead to something better, something that didn't involve compromise or shame. She wanted to give them a future where they could grow up with pride, not in the shadow of debts and struggles. But the reality of what Charles had offered still weighed heavily on her. She had gone through all the mental gymnastics, trying to convince herself that it wasn't the right thing. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that maybe she was fooling herself. Maybe she was just too afraid to take the chance because it was so unfamiliar, so completely different from the path she had always planned for herself. Maybe what she feared most wasn't the offer itself, but the unknown, what her life might become if she took that leap of faith. The phone buzzed on the table, jolting her out of her thoughts. It was a text from her mother again, reminding her about the baby shower, asking if she needed help preparing. Lily could almost feel the pressure from the other side of the screen. Her mom was well-meaning, of course, but it was clear that she didn't understand just how hard things had been. She didn't understand the weight Lily was carrying alone. Lily put the phone down without responding. She couldn't deal with it right now. Her thoughts were too scattered, her emotions too raw. She needed space, time to figure out what she wanted, what she needed for herself and her baby. There was no easy answer to this. As the hours passed, the weight of indecision grew heavier, and Lily realized she couldn't keep putting it off. This wasn't something that could wait any longer. She needed to make a decision, not just for herself, but for the baby. The decision she made now would shape their future in ways she couldn't even begin to understand. She found herself driving back to the same coffee shop where it had all started. The memories from that day felt fresh, as if it had all happened just yesterday. She could still picture Charles sitting at that table, his calm demeanor hiding the intense thoughts behind his eyes. His challenge had been like a spark, igniting something deep within her. She had no idea then just how much that moment would come to define everything that came after. When she stepped into the coffee shop this time, Charles was already there, sitting at the same table, the same spot by the window. His gaze lifted when she entered, and for a moment, their eyes met. There was no judgment there, no expectation, just an unwavering calmness. Lily hesitated for a moment, but then she walked over, sitting down across from him without a word. Her stomach was in knots, her heart pounding in her chest. This was it, the moment she had been dreading, but also the moment she had been preparing for. "I've thought about it," she said finally, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "I've been thinking about it non-stop." Charles nodded but didn't speak, giving her the space she needed. "I don't want to make a decision just because it's easier, just because it's what I want right now," Lily continued. "I don't want to take the easy way out." Charles leaned forward, his eyes focused on her. "It's not about taking the easy way out, Lily. It's about what's best for you and your future. For your baby. You don't have to do this alone anymore." Lily took a deep breath. The words seemed to hang in the air, heavy with meaning. She knew there were risks in accepting his offer, risks that were impossible to ignore. But she also knew that her life couldn't continue in the way it had been. She couldn't keep spinning her wheels, trapped in a cycle that was leading nowhere. If she was going to make a change, now was the time. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice quieter now. "I'm scared of what I might lose. I'm scared of what this might mean for my future." Charles sat back, giving her the time she needed. "Fear is natural. But sometimes, we have to take risks to get to where we really want to go. If you keep waiting for the perfect moment, you'll never make a move. There will always be something holding you back." Lily nodded slowly, the words sinking deep into her. He was right. The perfect moment didn't exist. There would always be something to fear, something to hold her back. But maybe it was time to stop being held captive by fear. "I don't know if I'm ready for all of this," she said softly. "But I think I'm ready to try. To take a chance." Charles gave her a small, reassuring smile. "That's all I'm asking. A chance. I won't let you down." Lily looked out the window for a moment, her thoughts swirling. She was taking a risk, a big one. But wasn't that what life was all about? Taking chances, even when the outcome was uncertain? She didn't have all the answers, but she knew she couldn't keep waiting for life to hand her the perfect opportunity. The time for change was now, and maybe, just maybe, Charles was the one to help her make it happen. "I'm in," she said, the words coming out with a mix of uncertainty and determination. Charles didn't respond immediately, but there was a subtle shift in his expression, a small sign of approval. He reached for his phone and typed something quickly before looking back at her. "I'll make the arrangements," he said. "From here on out, things will be different." As Lily sat there, the weight of the decision settling over her, she couldn't help but wonder what her life would look like now. Would she regret this? Would she be making the right choice for her baby, for her future? She didn't know. But for the first time in a long while, she felt like she was moving toward something that could change everything. The fear was still there, but it was accompanied by something new, hope.